The collar adjustment lasted mere seconds, but time froze as her fingers brushed against his neck. "You smell different today," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. James couldn't tell her the truth, that he'd borrowed his 5-year-old daughter's strawberry shampoo because they'd run out of his own. Some secrets were too vulnerable to share with your boss, especially when you were already falling for her. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys that capture the complexity of modern relationships. Your support helps us continue creating content that touches hearts. James Parker never expected to find himself working directly under Eliza Montgomery, the formidable CEO of Montgomery Enterprises. He certainly never expected to feel his heart race whenever she entered a room. As a single father still healing from his wife's death 3 years ago, romance was the last thing on his mind, until Eliza started noticing things about him that no one else did. The morning had begun like any other in the Parker household, chaotic. James juggled making breakfast for his daughter Sophie while ironing his shirt and reviewing presentation notes. At 5 years old, Sophie was a whirlwind of energy and questions, especially on days when her father had important meetings. "Daddy, why do you have to go to work today?" Sophie asked, her small fingers clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit as she watched him rush around their modest kitchen. "Because, Soph, Daddy has a big meeting with Ms. Montgomery and the board members," James explained, checking his watch. They were already running late for Sophie's daycare drop-off. "Is Ms. Montgomery the pretty lady from your Christmas party? The one who gave me the sparkly headband?" Sophie's innocent question made James pause. He hadn't realized his daughter had been paying such close attention that night. "Yes, that's her. She's my boss, and she's very important," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral despite the warmth creeping into his cheeks. "I think she likes you, Daddy. She smiled at you a lot." James chuckled, ruffling his daughter's hair. "That's just being polite, sweetheart. Now finish your cereal so we can get going." The morning routine continued with its usual mishaps, a spilled cup of milk, a missing shoe, and finally, the discovery that they were completely out of James's shampoo. With no time to run to the store, he'd reluctantly used Sophie's strawberry-scented children's shampoo, making a mental note to stop at the grocery store after work. By the time he dropped Sophie off at daycare and made it to the office, James was already 10 minutes late for the pre-meeting briefing. He rushed through the lobby of the sleek high-rise that housed Montgomery Enterprises, straightening his tie in the elevator mirror and trying to ignore the lingering scent of artificial strawberries that seemed to follow him. The conference room was already full when he arrived. Board members in expensive suits sat around the long table, their attention focused on Eliza Montgomery as she reviewed quarterly projections. At 38, Eliza had taken over the company 5 years ago after her father's retirement, transforming it from a traditional manufacturing business into a forward-thinking tech enterprise. She commanded respect not through intimidation but through her brilliant strategic mind and unwavering integrity. "Mr. Parker, glad you could join us," Eliza said, her voice carrying no hint of reproach despite his tardiness. "We were just discussing your department's performance metrics." "I apologize for the delay, Ms. Montgomery," James replied, sliding into the only empty seat, directly across from her. The meeting proceeded smoothly, with James presenting his team's findings on market expansion opportunities. Throughout his presentation, he couldn't help but notice Eliza watching him with unusual intensity, her sharp green eyes missing nothing. When the meeting concluded and the board members filed out, James gathered his materials, expecting to follow them. "Mr. Parker, could you stay behind for a moment?" Eliza's voice stopped him at the door. James turned, his heart inexplicably picking up pace. "Of course." When the last board member had left, Eliza closed the conference room door and approached him. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted, a quality James had always admired about her. "Your presentation was excellent," she said, standing closer than was strictly necessary for professional conversation. "The board was impressed with your insights on the Asian markets." "Thank you." I've been researching potential partnerships in Singapore and... His words faltered as Eliza reached up and adjusted his collar, her fingers lingering against the skin of his neck. The touch was light but deliberate, sending an unexpected current through him. Your collar was crooked, she explained softly, though her hands remained where they were. Then, leaning slightly closer, she inhaled and whispered, you smell different today. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. James felt his professional composure slipping, replaced by a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. I ran out of shampoo this morning, he admitted, wondering why he was sharing such a mundane detail. Had to use my daughter's. Something in Eliza's expression softened at the mention of Sophie. The strawberry scent suits you, she said with a small smile. It's unexpected. Before James could respond, her professional demeanor returned. She stepped back, creating appropriate distance between them. I'd like you to lead the Singapore initiative. You'll need to fly out next month for initial meetings. Will that be a problem with your daughter? The sudden shift back to business left James momentarily disoriented. I'll need to make arrangements for Sophie, but I can make it work. Good. My assistant will send you the details. Eliza moved toward the door, then paused. And James? Perhaps we could discuss the project further over dinner sometime. To prepare for the trip. With that, she was gone, leaving James standing alone in the conference room, his collar still warm from her touch, wondering if his CEO had just asked him on a date. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation for the Singapore trip, late nights at the office, and increasingly complex feelings about Eliza Montgomery. That brief moment in the conference room had shifted something between them, creating an undercurrent of tension that surfaced in small ways, lingering glances during meetings, casual touches that felt anything but casual, and conversations that seemed to carry double meanings. Yet neither of them acknowledged it directly. James told himself he was imagining things, that a woman like Eliza couldn't possibly be interested in a widowed single father still struggling to balance work and parenting. And even if she was, office romances were complicated enough without adding the CEO-employee dynamic. Sophie, however, had no such reservations about Eliza. When James mentioned that his boss might join them for dinner to discuss work, his daughter had been ecstatic. Can I wear my princess dress? The blue one? Sophie asked, bouncing on her bed as James tucked her in the night before the planned dinner. It's just a work dinner, sophomore Ms. Montgomery is coming over to talk about a business trip I'm taking. Sophie fixed him with a look of exasperation that seemed beyond her 5 years. Daddy, when a pretty lady comes to your house for dinner, you're supposed to make it special. James couldn't help but laugh. Oh, is that right? And where did you learn that? From Grandma. She says you need to start dating again because you're too young to be alone forever. Sophie delivered this information matter-of-factly, unaware of how it pierced James's heart. His mother meant well, but she didn't understand that moving on wasn't simply a matter of deciding to date again. After losing Sarah to cancer 3 years ago, the idea of opening himself up to that kind of potential loss again terrified him. And yet, when he thought of Eliza, her quiet strength, her unexpected gentleness with Sophie at the company Christmas party, the way she'd touched his collar, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, possibility. The dinner itself was a disaster from the start. James had attempted to cook an impressive meal, only to burn the main course. Sophie had indeed worn her princess dress, complete with a plastic tiara, and had greeted Eliza at the door by announcing, "Daddy says you're his boss, but Grandma says he needs a girlfriend." Eliza, to her credit, had handled the evening with grace and humor. She'd helped James salvage dinner, charmed Sophie with stories about the real princesses she'd met during business trips abroad, and somehow managed to discuss the Singapore project between it all. By the time Sophie was in bed and they were sharing a glass of wine on the small balcony of James's apartment, the professional pretense had worn thin. "Thank you for tonight," James said, watching the city lights below them. "I'm sorry about the burnt chicken and Sophie's directness. Eliza laughed softly. I found it refreshing. Both the directness and seeing this side of you. She turned to face him, her expression serious. You're different outside the office, James. More real. Is that good or bad? Good. Definitely good. She hesitated, then added, I've been wanting to get to know the real James Parker for some time now. The admission hung between them, an invitation James wasn't sure he was ready to accept. Eliza, This is complicated. You're my boss, and I have Sophie to consider, and I haven't been with anyone since Sarah died. I'm not asking for anything, she interrupted gently. I'm just acknowledging what's happening between us. Whatever that might be. James looked at her then, really looked at her. In the soft glow from the living room lights, Eliza appeared less like the formidable CEO and more like a woman who understood loneliness, who recognized the fear in his eyes because she carried her own version of it. What if we get this wrong? He asked quietly. What if we don't? She countered. James, I've spent my entire adult life making calculated decisions, weighing risks against potential rewards. But some things can't be approached that way. She reached out, her fingers lightly touching his hand. Some risks are worth taking simply because not taking them would be the greater loss. Before he could respond, his phone rang, the daycare's emergency number. Sophie had woken with a high fever and needed to be picked up immediately. The moment between them shattered as James shifted instantly into father mode, apologizing as he grabbed his keys. Let me drive you, Eliza offered, already reaching for her purse. You're too worried to drive safely. It wasn't until they were in the hospital emergency room 3 hours later, with Sophie diagnosed with a severe ear infection and finally sleeping under the influence of antibiotics and pain medication, that James realized what had happened. Eliza Montgomery, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, had spent her evening in a pediatric emergency room, bringing him coffee from the vending machine and quietly handling work emails on her phone while he spoke with doctors. When he returned to the plastic chair beside her after Sophie had finally fallen asleep, James felt something shift inside him, a wall beginning to crumble. You didn't have to stay, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Eliza looked up from her phone. I know. She slipped the device into her bag and studied his face. You look terrible. A surprised laugh escaped him. Thanks. It's been a while since I've had a compliment like that. I mean, you look exhausted, she clarified, her expression softening. When was the last time someone took care of you, James? The question caught him off guard, touching a loneliness he rarely acknowledged. I'm fine. Sophie's the one who needs taking care of. That wasn't my question. James looked away, unable to hold her gaze. Sarah used to, but that was a long time ago. Eliza's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. They sat like that, in silence, as the hospital bustled around them. It wasn't a dramatic declaration or a passionate embrace, but in that moment of shared vulnerability, something important began. The Singapore trip was postponed until Sophie recovered, but the delay only intensified whatever was developing between James and Eliza. They established a careful routine, professional at the office, where Eliza was scrupulous about avoiding any appearance of favoritism, but increasingly personal outside work hours. She joined them for movie nights at James's apartment, taught Sophie how to make paper airplanes that actually flew, and gradually became a presence in their lives that neither James nor his daughter wanted to lose. For James, watching Eliza with Sophie revealed dimensions of her character that he never would have discovered in the office. The CEO who could intimidate board members with a single raised eyebrow was the same woman who patiently answered a 5-year-old's endless questions and didn't mind when sticky fingers touched her expensive clothes. She's not trying to replace your mom, James assured Sophie one night as he tucked her in, worried about his daughter's growing attachment to Eliza. Sophie considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to important matters. I know, Daddy. Mommy is in heaven. But Ms. Eliza makes you smile again. I think Mommy would like that. Out of the mouths of babes, James thought, his throat tight with emotion. When they finally did travel to Singapore, with Sophie staying with her grandmother, the week of intensive business meetings also became a turning point in their relationship. Away from the scrutiny of the office and the responsibilities of parenthood, James and Eliza found spaces between negotiations and presentations to simply be together, exploring night markets, sharing meals in tiny local restaurants, and finally, on their last evening, acknowledging what had been building between them for months. They stood on the balcony of Eliza's hotel suite, overlooking the spectacular Singapore skyline. The business portion of their trip had been successful beyond expectations, with new partnerships established and contracts signed. But as they sipped champagne in celebration, business was the furthest thing from either of their minds. "I've been thinking about that day in the conference room," Eliza said suddenly. "When I fixed your collar." James smiled at the memory. "The strawberry shampoo incident. I'd noticed you long before that, you know." She turned to face him, her usual confidence tempered with a rare vulnerability. "From your first presentation to the board, I knew you were different. The way you spoke about your team, how you gave them credit for successes, it stood out in a company where most executives are focused on climbing the ladder." "I was terrified that day," James admitted. "Presenting to the board, to you. I'd rehearsed for weeks. You couldn't tell. You were brilliant." She paused, then added more softly, "But it was when I saw you with Sophie at the Christmas party that I really started to fall for you." The company's CEO who excused himself from a conversation with major investors to help a little girl find her lost teddy bear. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything about you, James." The simple honesty in her voice made his heart race. "And it terrifies me." "You, terrified?" He couldn't hide his surprise. "You're the most fearless person I know." Eliza laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm excellent at appearing fearless. It's different." She set down her champagne glass and moved closer to him. "The truth is, I've spent my entire career proving I deserve my position, that I'm not just Richard Montgomery's daughter. I've sacrificed personal relationships, made myself invulnerable, because that's what I thought leadership required." "And now?" James asked, hardly daring to breathe as she stood before him. "Now I find myself caring more about a single father and his daughter than about quarterly projections and board approval ratings." Her voice wavered slightly. "And I don't know how to reconcile those parts of my life." James reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe the woman who runs Montgomery Enterprises with brilliant strategic vision is the same woman who can help a 5-year-old build the perfect pillow fort. Is that what you see when you look at me? Both women? I see all of you, Eliza. And I'm falling in love with every part." The words hung between them, honest and terrifying in their simplicity. For a moment, James feared he'd said too much, moved too fast. Then Eliza closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure all at once. When they returned to New York, the reality of their situation required careful navigation. Office rumors spread quickly despite their discretion, and the board expressed concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Eliza faced the most scrutiny, with some questioning whether her judgment was compromised by her personal relationship with an employee. The pressure came to a head 3 months after their return, when a major client threatened to pull their business, citing concerns about unprofessional entanglements within the company leadership. The board called an emergency meeting, and James found himself sitting across from Eliza in the same conference room where she had first fixed his collar, except this time, the air between them was heavy with unspoken fears. "The board has suggested that one of you needs to leave the company," the chairman announced, looking uncomfortable. "While we value both your contributions, this situation has created a perception issue we can't ignore." James spoke before Eliza could. "I'll resign. Montgomery Enterprises needs Eliza more than it needs me." "No." Eliza's voice was firm.